Other regions haunted by visible vampires were more direct and brutal. In Dalmatia, the muscles and tendons at the back of the suspect corpse's legs were severed, rendering walking impossible. The same result would be achieved in Finland by nailing the vampire down or snapping its spine, and other places reported tying the toes and thumbs together. Bulgarians advocated stealing up on a bloated vampire and pricking it with a pin to enable its noisome gases to escape. Yet it is on the Christian tradition that attention must focus. Here the ritualistic element is just as compulsory. After all, a chance meeting with and destruction of any wandering vampire would otherwise lack credibility, and witness to the Church's awesome power. A priest must be summoned, for only he would have the requisite knowledge of the nature of evil and access to the necessary implements of counter-vampirism, which would provide evidence of God's power over Satan. Once the lair of the undead has been located and the coffin opened, and telltale signs of vampirism should be present. Following a nocturnal repast, the creature should have a ruddy complexion, with the mouth and nails blotted with blood. More spectacularly, it might even be floating on a squelching reservoir of blood, and if the flesh is punctured with a pin, and the red liquid should gush forth as from a burst balloon. Customarily, the eyes will be open, glazed, staring, and malefic. If the vampire has on occasion gone hungry or thirsty, the burial shroud will show signs of having been eaten, and perhaps also the limbs. Shortly after dawn is the best time to locate and destroy a vampire, for it will be then heavy and torpid after its banquet. 3 methods of destruction are prescribed: impalement, cremation, and decapitation. Impalement with a sharpened stake, properly known as transfixion, should be performed with a single blow through the heart or navel. Strange to say, transfixion does not achieve its effect in the way first imagined, although there is a potent symmetry about a blood fiend being destroyed by piercing its quintessential vital organ. This is to overlook its stubborn immunity. The need to impale with one stroke is frequently emphasized, for if it is repeated, the vampire would be resuscitated, reputedly being able to pull out the stake himself. The more usual explanation behind transfixion is that the vampire is thereby immobilized, impaled to the coffin floor. Later fiction writers and filmmakers would depart from folklore, not only in having the hero hammer away in a passionate orgy of hate, but also in showing the vampire killed as a consequence. Another cinematic distortion concerns the vampire's reaction to being staked, blood spurting from every orifice, accompanied by writhing, screaming, and foaming at the mouth. These tantrums are not the death agony of the folklore vampire. They are psychological and contrived. Should the staker keep a steady hand, then the vampire is doomed, but should his concentration falter, or his eyes meet their hypnotic, malevolent stare from within the coffin, then the tables are turned instantly, and the would-be executioner becomes the next victim, the next undead. It is for this reason that the need to transfix at the first attempt is paramount. Finding the wretched beast is comparatively straightforward compared with the nerves of steel needed to dispose of it. The Christian connection even found its way into the specifications of the wood to be used as the stake. Aspen, maple, ash, oak, whatever the local belief regarding the wood used for the cross. Proper transfixion would enable the priest to effect irrevocable victory by decapitation or cremation, unless the corpse had been dead for many years, in which case it would crumble into dust. In theory, cremation was the safest procedure, provided that every scrap of flesh and bone was incinerated, and any spiders, lice, worms, or snakes trying to scuttle from the flames, the vampire trying to escape, were tossed back. The ashes would then be scattered to the winds or into a river. The difficulty with cremating suspect vampires, though if carried out meticulously it was the most efficient means of disposal, was that it ran counter in some places to the approval of the Church. A cremated corpse destroyed the body which Christ had pledged to resurrect at the day of judgment. Moreover, cremation seemed to imitate heathen practices, and, at least to the Orthodox tradition, consuming with fire a body which had received the last rites and been sprinkled with holy oil smacked of sacrilege. Decapitation seemed to achieve the same desired effects as cremation, but with fewer drawbacks. The vampire's head would be removed, not with any handy sharp instrument, but by a sexton's spade. The body would then be hacked to pieces, inviting reminders of how, in olden times, certain notorious criminals or political offenders were punished. The value of decapitation would seem to be that it destroys the physical intactness necessary for any creature that wishes to rise again. To be absolutely sure, the heart could be removed, treated with oil or vinegar, and then shredded. Holy water poured over the now empty grave should finally spell irrevocable defeat for the vampire. Other miscellaneous methods to be found in Christian-based accounts include the use of a silver bullet, silver being a pure metal, properly blessed by a priest. It was important then to dispose of the vampire away from moonlight, which would otherwise resuscitate it with enhanced malevolence. Perhaps the most ingenious use to which Christian imagery could be put was found in parts of Bulgaria, where the undead would be hunted down with an icon and lured into a huge bottle, which would then be plugged with an equally huge cork, decorated with more holy images. The masterminding bottler would be handsomely rewarded, and the whole, bottle and contents, tossed into a blazing pyre. This particular tale would seem to have its roots in the Oriental belief that evil spirits could be enclosed in glass vessels, and is a classic instance of hybrid pagan Christian folklore. Alien as all the foregoing must appear to the modern mind, it is important to try to establish the secular commonplace occurrences which could give rise to such profound and unquestioning beliefs in vampires. Inaccurate diagnosis of death was a cardinal factor. Even today, with the brain virus tissue, death controversy occasioned when a patient is on a life support system. There is debate as to the precise moment of death. There is no irrefutable test as to when someone is no longer living. Cataleptic trances, for example, which can be induced through both physical and mental disorders, may be accompanied by a rapid slowing of the body metabolism, producing a condition which even to the trained medical eye can seem indistinguishable from death. The limbs may become rigid and the skin cold to the touch. Pronouncements of death in times and in lands of less developed medical knowledge were frequently and tragically premature. The only incontrovertible proof was, and is, dissolution. In Bram Stoker's time, this was openly acknowledged. In 1885, the British Medical Journal confirmed, "It is true that hardly any one sign of death, short of putrefaction, can be relied upon as infallible. To the superstitious, logic would dictate that decomposition was the only sure sign of death, so non-decomposition must be proof of the undead." This fundamental diagnostic difficulty has, upon a moment's thought, an unpalatable consequence. Throughout history, many people have unwittingly been buried alive. Some would not have regained consciousness thereafter, but others would. In time succumbing to asphyxia or starvation. A very few would have succeeded in breaking out of their submerged confinement, for burial arrangements were frequently haphazard, makeshift, fragile coffins and shallow graves. The use of communal burial ground was not commonplace in continental Europe. The dead would be buried almost anywhere, on hills, in caves, in woods, in fields, in proximity to other graves or in isolation, either singly or in family groups. Needless to say, any dishevelled, hysterical, blood-stained, mud-smeared, white-shrouded figure that did somehow escape from its grave would have tried to seek out its relatives, inducing panic in anyone it encountered, and ending up unleashing a vampire mania. Bodies easily buried could be disinterred, and they were, whether in search for vampires or loot. The age-old custom of taking personal valuables to the grave encouraged a reciprocal profession of grave robbing. Sometimes the theft would be of jewellery, sometimes of the corpse itself, which could fetch a substantial price from no-questions-asked anatomy schools, unable to procure adequate supplies from legitimate sources. The infamous Burke and Hare, convicted in Edinburgh in the 1820s, are only the most celebrated British practitioners of the trade in bodies. Naturally enough, the later discovery of a rifled grave, either deprived of its human contents or else showing the corpse in an unnatural pose as the result of violent removal of personal effects, could have only one explanatory cause: the presence of a vampire, for the evidence told of the corpse having moved itself. The business of decomposition is also relevant in other ways, for its rate is not constant. Soil conditions can vary the speed, dry soils tending to preserve, as of course does freezing. The cause of death can act likewise, and a body inadvertently buried alive would take longer to decompose through not being exposed to air once the vital functions had ceased. Sufferers of particular rare diseases that produce visually alarming symptoms might easily at one time have been condemned as vampires. Albinos possess the requisite pallor and photophobia, a rare disorder known as porphyria. Moreover, results in the teeth, hair and nails glowing fluorescently. Sufferers are extremely sensitive to sunlight, and the disease can be hereditary. With iron deficiency porphyria, the body cannot metabolize iron and must take it in readily digestible form, such as drinking blood. For persons with this order, the eating of garlic is not recommended, for garlic activates the functions which break down old blood cells, thereby removing the iron that the body needs. In the case of pernicious anemia, a series of rare blood disorder, the body of the sufferer can shrivel up and produce a physical craving for blood. Tuberculosis was more common and could result in recognizable vampire symptoms, weight loss and fatigue, not to mention coughing and splitting blood in advanced cases. Significantly, the disease had been known to be conveyed by a carrier who is himself immune, an obvious vampire candidate should his identity be disclosed. Cholera dries out the body and produces a physical wasting, and cancer has comparable manifestations, both diseases being suggestive of vampire attack. The later symptoms of rabies, too, can include spasms, convulsions, and difficulty in the breathing, together with a manifest terror of water. Most pertinent of all, however, was the plague, whose epidemics were silent, invisible, and inexplicable, appearing without reason or warning. The Great Plague, which decimated London in 1665 and 6, is now known to have been caused by rats and fleas, but at the time, lacking the necessary medical and scientific knowledge, it was widely attributed to heavenly punishment for earthly sins. In parts of the continent, only a vampire onslaught could account for the massive loss of life brought about by periodic epidemics. For reasons of hygiene, victims were disposed of with unseemly haste. There were not enough doctors and undertakers to cope, with the result that not only were many of the afflicted buried alive, but their graves too were amateurish and shallow.